Let me ask you something. What would you do if the person who once laughed at you was suddenly standing in the shadow of your success while the whole world finally saw the truth? Would you stay silent, or would you take the chance to reclaim your story in front of everyone who once doubted you? This isn't just Clara's story, it could be yours. Trust me, by the end, you'll feel every heartbeat of this journey. The laughter still rang in her ears, sharp and mocking, even after all these years. It was the kind of laugh meant to crush you, to remind you that you were nothing. Clara had stood there, trying not to let her hands shake, as her then-husband Ethan tossed out the words like a dagger. "That's your new man? Please, Clara, you could do better picking from the line at the DMV." His friends had snickered, the mistress on his arm smiling like she'd already won. Back then, she had smiled weakly, trying to pretend the insult didn't pierce her straight through. Back then, she was still the woman who kept quiet, who folded laundry at midnight while her husband schmoozed clients over champagne, who bit her tongue at every sarcastic jab about her cheap shoes or her quaint little job at the library. But that was before. Before the night she left with nothing but 2 suitcases and the kind of pain that strips you down to the bone. Before the man Ethan laughed at became her partner, her protector, and the mind behind a tech empire worth billions. Before Forbes printed his name in bold black ink as the #1 billionaire under 40 in the entire country. Clara Mayfield had not been born into money. She grew up in a weathered 2-story house on the edge of Des Moines, Iowa. Her father was a machinist, her mother a kindergarten teacher who brought home stacks of construction paper and glue sticks for Clara to make art. Life was modest but warm. She wore hand-me-down coats, learned to cook on a dented stove, and dreamed of seeing the world beyond cornfields and strip malls. At 22, she moved to Chicago for graduate school. That's where she met Ethan Warner. Tall, confident, with the kind of easy charm that could talk a room into anything. He wasn't rich back then, but he carried himself like someone who would be. Clara fell hard. She believed his late-night talks about building an empire together. When he proposed in a candlelit rooftop restaurant, she thought she'd found forever. For the first few years, it was good. Ethan worked long hours in real estate, but he still brought her flowers on Fridays. They rented a small apartment, saved for a house, and talked about kids. But somewhere between his first big deal and his first luxury car, Ethan changed. The little things came first. A comment about how she should dress more modern, a suggestion that she quit her job because it's barely worth your time. Then came the absences, the networking trips that ended with hotel receipts she wasn't meant to see, the lipstick on his collar that didn't belong to her. Clara tried. God, she tried. She read marriage books, cooked his favorite meals, smiled at parties even when she knew the woman on his arm the night before had been more than a client. But the night it all broke was the night he publicly humiliated her. It was at a charity gala for the city's children's hospital. She had worn her best, a pale blue gown she'd saved up for over months, simple but elegant. Ethan had arrived late, already flushed from champagne, with a leggy brunette in a dress that looked spray-painted on. Clara watched him introduce the woman to everyone as a close business associate. The way his hand stayed too long on the woman's back told another story. When one of Ethan's buddies, drunk and careless, asked Clara if she'd found herself a rebound yet, she had made the mistake of laughing it off. Ethan had leaned in, smirking, and delivered the line that would echo for years. Her new man? Please. The only thing he'd be good at is fixing her flat tire. They had laughed. She had frozen. And something deep inside her had snapped. She didn't scream. She didn't throw wine in his face like in the movies. She simply left. Slipped out into the cold night air, heels clicking against the marble, and called a cab. By the next afternoon, she was gone. Out of the penthouse, off the credit cards, and out of Ethan Warner's carefully curated life. For months, she floated between small apartments and couch stays with friends. Divorce paperwork came through like a formality. Ethan barely blinked when he signed away the marriage, already flaunting his mistress on social media. She told herself she was fine. She told herself she didn't care. Then, one rainy afternoon in a quiet coffee shop, she met Daniel Reeve. He wasn't flashy, no tailored suit, no Rolex, no smooth rehearsed lines, just a man in a navy hoodie scribbling notes into a weathered notebook, sipping black coffee. She had been hunched over a resume draft, trying to figure out how to re-enter the workforce after years as a corporate wife, when he asked if she needed the outlet by his table. They started talking. At first, it was casual. Books, favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurants, the best way to make scrambled eggs. He never pushed, never pried into the obvious scars she carried. He just saw her. Not the ex-wife of a rising real estate mogul, not a charity gala accessory, just Clara. She learned he was working on a tech startup idea, something about AI-driven logistics for supply chains. He spoke about it with the kind of quiet conviction that made you believe in him. She didn't know much about algorithms or machine learning, but she knew about hard work, about late nights and unshakable belief. And slowly, without her meaning to, she began to hope again. It wasn't until months later, when Ethan happened to spot them together at a farmer's market, that the laughter came. He had been there with the mistress, still the same one, buying overpriced organic honey. He'd spotted Daniel, looked him up and down, and laughed. That smug, cutting laugh. "Really, Clara?" he'd said, loud enough for everyone within 10 feet to hear. "That's your new man? What does he make? Minimum wage?" Daniel had only smiled politely, extended his hand, and said, "Nice to meet you." Ethan hadn't shaken it. The mistress had smirked. Clara had walked away without a word, but her cheeks had burned all the way home. She didn't know then, couldn't have known, that the man Ethan had just mocked would one day be worth more than Ethan could dream of. That Forbes would one day put Daniel Reeve on their cover, crowned as the #1 billionaire under 40. And she definitely didn't know that fate was already winding its way toward a moment where Ethan Warner would regret every single word he'd ever said to her. And it would happen in front of the entire world. Chicago in the spring was a city of contradictions. The river shimmered green under the morning sun, while skyscrapers cast long, cold shadows over the bustling streets. It was in one of these glass towers that Daniel Reeve's vision began to take shape. When Clara first stepped into his new office space, she barely recognized the man she'd met in that coffee shop. The hoodie was gone, replaced by a crisp white shirt and tailored slacks. The small spiral notebook had evolved into a sleek laptop filled with investor pitches, product mock-ups, and global market data. "This is it?" she asked, glancing around the half-furnished space. The walls were bare, the desks mismatched, but there was an energy in the air. Sharp, focused, electric. "This is where it starts," Daniel said, smiling as he rolled up his sleeves. "We're building something big, Clara, something that can change the way the world moves goods." At first, she came by just to bring lunch, to listen to him talk through logistics algorithms she barely understood. But slowly, she became part of it, helping organize investor dinners, proofreading press releases, connecting Daniel with contacts from her old life. She had been invisible in Ethan's world. But here, she was essential. By year 2, Reeve Logistics had grown from 3 people in a cramped office to a team of 50 in a downtown high-rise. Tech blogs started writing about them. Venture capitalists fought for meetings. Clara could see it happening. The quiet, steady transformation of a man with an idea into a man with a legacy in the making. Daniel never changed toward her, though. Even as meetings took him to New York, Singapore, and Dubai, he still made her coffee every morning when he was home. Still asked about her day first. Still looked at her like she was the most important person in the room. Meanwhile, Ethan's life was going exactly the way he thought it would. Until it wasn't. After their divorce, he'd married the brunette mistress, her name was Tara, in a lavish destination wedding in the Maldives. Social media saw endless photos of yacht trips, champagne brunches, and designer shopping halls. His real estate firm boomed for a while, riding the high of an aggressive development streak, but the market turned. 2 high-profile projects stalled. Investors got skittish. Tara's taste for luxury only grew, and Ethan's easy confidence began to crack. The first time Ethan heard Daniel's name again was at a charity auction. A fellow developer leaned over and said, "You know Reeve Logistics? They're killing it. Raised another $100 million last quarter." Ethan had shrugged it off. Logistics wasn't sexy. Trucks and warehouses didn't get your name in Architectural Digest. But the name kept popping up. in business articles, on LinkedIn, in conversations at networking events. Reeve Logistics had landed contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies, then 5, then 10. By the third year, they had gone public. The IPO was one of the largest in the decade, instantly catapulting Daniel's net worth into the billions. Forbes put him on the 40 under 40 list. TechCrunch called him the quiet disruptor. Clara watched it all unfold from a front row seat, but she wasn't thinking about the headlines. She was thinking about the nights Daniel came home exhausted but smiling, about the way he treated every employee like family, about the small ways he still chose her over everything else. And then, fate decided it was time to bring Ethan back into their orbit. It started with a gala, not unlike the one where Ethan had humiliated her years before. This one was hosted by the International Children's Fund, a black-tie event held at the historic Astoria Ballroom. Daniel had been invited as an honored guest for his company's work in donating shipping logistics for disaster relief. Clara hesitated when the invitation came. The Astoria was part of her old world. The world where women were judged on the label of their gown and the sparkle of their jewelry. But Daniel had looked at her with that quiet encouragement she knew so well. "You belong there," he said simply. "Not because of me, because of you." The night of the gala, Clara chose a gown unlike anything she'd worn before. Emerald silk that skimmed her figure, paired with understated diamond earrings Daniel had given her on their first anniversary. When they walked into the ballroom, cameras flashed instantly. She hadn't realized just how much attention Daniel now commanded until that moment. People surged toward them, CEOs, philanthropists, even a senator, shaking hands, asking questions, angling for photos. Clara smiled graciously, holding Daniel's arm, but inside she was marveling at how far they'd come from that mismatched office with bare walls. And then, across the room, she saw him. Ethan. Older, but still tall and broad-shouldered, still wearing that practiced smirk. Tara was on his arm in a glittering silver dress, hair perfectly styled. The moment his eyes landed on Clara, the smirk faltered, just slightly, before reforming into something sharper. They hadn't spoken in years. He started walking toward them, Tara in tow. "Clara," he said smoothly, as if they were old friends. "It's been a while." His gaze slid to Daniel. "And you must be the new man." Daniel extended his hand. "Daniel Reeve, nice to meet you." Ethan's handshake was quick, perfunctory. "Reeve, logistics, right? You're doing trucks or something?" Clara felt Daniel's subtle squeeze on her arm, a silent signal to let it pass. But before she could reply, a voice from behind them called out, "Daniel, can we get a shot of you for the Forbes cover preview?" The photographer stepped closer, flashing an apologetic smile at Ethan. "We just want a quick one of the #1 billionaire under 40. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. Ethan's expression froze for a fraction of a second before he forced a laugh. "Billionaire, huh? Guess you've done all right for yourself," he said. But there was a tightness around his eyes, Clara recognized. They posed for the photo, flashbulbs popping, while Ethan and Tara stood a few feet away, watching. When the photographer moved on, Ethan made some excuse about needing to say hello to another guest and walked off, his smile brittle. Clara exhaled slowly. Part of her had thought this moment, the moment Ethan realized exactly who Daniel had become, would bring some kind of triumphant rush. But what she felt instead was quieter, steadier. She didn't need him to grovel. She didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. The only thing she cared about was the man standing beside her, the one who'd built his empire without tearing her down. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time Ethan Warner would cross their path. And she was right, because somewhere, in the shadows of that glittering ballroom, Ethan was already plotting. And the next time they met, it wouldn't be by chance. It would be a collision. Ethan Warner had always believed in two things, that money erased mistakes, and that charm erased the rest. In his mind, reputations were like properties. They could be remodeled, polished, staged, and sold again. But standing in that ballroom, watching Daniel Reeve soak in the attention, Ethan had felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A threat. It wasn't just that Daniel was wealthy. Ethan had known rich men before, partnered with them, undercut them, even outplayed them. This was different. Daniel was respected. People weren't circling him out of fear or greed. They were drawn to him because they believed in him. Ethan could see it in the way guests leaned in when Daniel spoke, in the genuine smiles that lit up faces when he shook their hand. And Clara, his Clara, was right there in the center of it. She didn't have the tight, polite smile she used to wear at Ethan's side. Now she looked alive, radiant, like she belonged in every glittering frame. That image lodged in Ethan's mind like a splinter. By the time the gala ended, he'd already decided. He wasn't going to fade into the background while Clara and her billionaire husband, boyfriend, fiancé, whatever he was, became the city's golden couple. No, Ethan was going to remind everyone, especially Clara, who had made her. The opportunity came quicker than he expected. 2 weeks later, Ethan received an invitation to the North American Real Estate and Infrastructure Conference, a 3-day summit attended by power brokers from multiple industries. The keynote speaker? Daniel Reeve. The topic: Innovation in Supply Chain Logistics for Large-Scale Urban Development. Ethan's smirk returned. Real estate and logistics might not overlap much on paper, but in the high-stakes world of multi-billion-dollar projects, influence was currency. And Ethan knew just how to spend his. He called an old contact, a media consultant who owed him a favor, and pitched an idea, an exclusive side event during the conference. A networking dinner for select VIPs, hosted by Warner Development. It would be invitation-only, media-friendly, and most importantly, positioned as the place to be on the conference's opening night. He made sure Clara's name was on the guest list. When she received the email, Clara showed it to Daniel over breakfast. "It's from Ethan," she said, her voice even but cautious. "He's hosting some kind of dinner." Daniel sipped his coffee. "You want to go?" "I don't know." She traced the rim of her mug. "Part of me thinks it's a bad idea. The other part thinks I'm done avoiding him." Daniel met her eyes. "Then we go, together." The dinner was held at the Monarch, a rooftop restaurant with panoramic views of the city. Guests arrived in black cars, stepping out in couture gowns and hand-tailored suits. Photographers lined the entrance, flashing bulbs, capturing every arrival. Inside, the lighting was warm, the air perfumed with roses and expensive whiskey. Ethan stood at the center of it all, greeting people like a king holding court. Tara was draped on his arm, her diamond bracelet glittering under the chandeliers. When Clara and Daniel entered, conversation in their immediate vicinity dimmed just slightly, enough for her to notice. She felt the weight of eyes on her, the subtle ripple of whispers. "Clara," Ethan said, stepping forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Daniel, glad you could make it." "Thanks for the invite," Daniel replied, his tone polite but cool. Ethan gestured toward the long dining table. "Please sit, I've saved you the best seats, right across from me." Dinner began pleasantly enough. Waiters glided between tables with courses of seared scallops, truffle risotto, and aged ribeye. Ethan kept the conversation light, asking Daniel about expansion plans, sprinkling in compliments about Reeve Logistics' impressive growth. But Clara could feel it, the undercurrent. Ethan was building to something. It came during the third course. One of the reporters invited to the dinner asked a question about public-private partnerships in large development projects. Ethan leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Well," he began, "I think partnerships are all about knowing the right people. Take Clara here. Back in the day, she didn't have a single contact in this city. Everything she knows about these circles, about how to move in them, she learned from me." The table went uncomfortably quiet. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Ethan smiled, as if unaware of the tension. Of course, now she's with Daniel. She's got an even bigger stage, but let's not forget where it started. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. Clara placed her fork down deliberately. "Actually," she said calmly, "what I learned from you, Ethan, was what I never wanted in a partner." A few gasps. Even the clink of silverware paused. Ethan chuckled, but his eyes had gone hard. "Careful, Clara. People might think you're ungrateful." Daniel's voice was quiet but steady. "I think people here are smart enough to see gratitude and condescension aren't the same thing." The reporter's eyes lit up. A headline was practically writing itself. Ethan quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. Cameras had caught every flicker of expression, every pause, and by the time dessert was served, Clara could tell Ethan knew it. Still, she also knew this wasn't over. Ethan wasn't the type to take a public bruise without striking back. Her suspicion was confirmed the next morning when she opened her phone to find her inbox flooded. One subject line made her stomach twist. Exclusive: Daniel Reeves' shocking past connection to Clara Warner. The article wasn't subtle. It dug into her divorce, painting her as a woman who had traded up from a struggling developer to a tech mogul. It quoted unnamed sources, implying Daniel's early investors had been swayed more by Clara's social connections than his business plan. It was a calculated smear, not just at Daniel's credibility, but at hers. Daniel read it over her shoulder, his expression unreadable. "We'll deal with it," he said simply. But Ethan wasn't done. Later that week, Clara received an invitation to another event, this time a televised charity auction where Daniel had been slated to present a major donation. She knew instantly that Ethan would be there, and if she was right, he'd have one last play up his sleeve, something designed to humiliate them on a stage far bigger than any rooftop dinner. She closed the invitation slowly, her mind already racing. If Ethan wanted a public battle, maybe it was time she stopped playing defense. Because Clara Mayfield had learned a long time ago that the best way to beat a man like Ethan wasn't to avoid his stage. It was to own it. And soon, the spotlight would be hers. The night of the televised charity auction arrived with the kind of fanfare that made even the most jaded socialites straighten their posture. The annual Hearts for Hope Gala wasn't just another society event. It was broadcast live, drawing millions of viewers, with A-list celebrities, CEOs, and politicians vying for camera time. Daniel had been invited as a headline donor. His company's logistics network had been instrumental in delivering aid to hurricane victims in record time, and tonight he would present a $5 million matching grant to expand relief operations. For weeks, Clara had been helping him prepare, from the speech to the choice of suit. She wanted everything flawless. But in the back of her mind, the shadow of Ethan's invitation loomed. They arrived at the Grand Regency Hotel ballroom under a cascade of flashbulbs. Clara wore a deep crimson gown that hugged her figure, paired with understated diamond studs. Daniel was in a tailored black tuxedo, every inch the poised billionaire philanthropist. As they stepped onto the red carpet, reporters called out questions about the donation, the company's next big project, even about Clara's gown designer. Inside, the ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes. A raised stage sat at the far end, flanked by massive LED screens projecting live footage of the event. Rows of tables surrounded it, each decorated with towering floral arrangements. Clara spotted him almost immediately. Ethan was stationed near the front, Tara by his side in a gold sequined dress. He was laughing with a group of guests, but his eyes flicked toward Clara the moment she entered. That familiar smirk returned, slow and deliberate, like he was savoring a secret. During the cocktail hour, Clara and Daniel mingled with other donors, but every time she glanced toward Ethan, he seemed to be in quiet conversation with someone. A reporter, a cameraman, one of the event organizers. Each time, his gaze would drift toward her, then to Daniel, before returning to whoever he was speaking with. Her instincts told her he was setting something up. Finally, the MC took the stage, welcoming guests and highlighting the evening's agenda. The auction began with smaller items. A weekend at a Napa Valley villa, a private yacht charter, before building toward the headline presentations. When it was time for Daniel's segment, the MC's voice rang out. "And now, please welcome to the stage, Mr. Daniel Reeve, CEO of Reeve Logistics, here to make a very special announcement." Daniel rose, buttoning his jacket. Clara squeezed his hand as he made his way to the podium, the spotlight following him. Cameras zoomed in, projecting his image onto the giant screens. But just as he began to speak, the MC's earpiece crackled, and a stagehand hurried up the stairs, whispering something. The MC's brows lifted in surprise before he stepped forward. "Before we hear from Mr. Reeve," he said, his voice overly smooth, "we have an unexpected guest who'd like to say a few words." The ballroom doors opened dramatically, and Ethan strode in. Clara's chest tightened. "I promise to be brief," Ethan said, already halfway to the microphone. The MC, perhaps caught up in the spectacle, handed it over. Ethan turned to the audience, smiling like a man about to deliver the punchline of a great joke. Many of you know me as a real estate developer here in Chicago. What you might not know is that I once had the privilege of being married to this lovely woman right here." He gestured toward Clara, and every spotlight in the room seemed to find her at once. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Cameras swung toward her, catching her composed expression. Ethan went on, "I just want everyone to understand the unique path that led us here tonight. You see, Clara used to attend events like this on my arm, and now she's here on the arm of the #1 billionaire under 40. His laugh was soft but dripping with implication. "Talk about an upgrade, right?" A few awkward chuckles. The tension in the room was thick. Clara knew exactly what he was doing, reframing her as someone who climbed her way into wealth through relationships, undermining both her and Daniel's credibility. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady. "Are you finished, Ethan?" But before Ethan could reply, Clara rose from her seat and began walking toward the stage. The cameras tracked her every step. She reached the podium, placed a hand on Daniel's arm, and turned to the audience. "It's true," she said, her voice calm but carrying through the ballroom. "Ethan and I were married once, and I'm grateful for that, because it taught me exactly what I deserved and what I didn't." A murmur spread. She continued, "When I met Daniel, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't even close, but he was kind. He respected me, and he built everything you see today through vision and hard work, not through tearing others down." Daniel's eyes softened as she spoke. Clara's tone sharpened just slightly. "So if anyone wants to call that an upgrade, I won't argue. But the real upgrade was finding a partner who values people over power." The applause started in one corner of the room, then grew until it filled the space. Ethan's smirk faltered. The MC, sensing the tide, quickly reclaimed the microphone. "And now let's return to the reason we're here. Daniel Reeves' incredible generosity." Daniel delivered his prepared remarks without missing a beat, announcing the $5 million matching grant to thunderous applause. Clara returned to her seat, her pulse still racing but her head high. When the segment ended, guests swarmed their table to congratulate them, while Ethan sat at his jaw tight, Tara whispering something that made his shoulders stiffen. But as the evening wound down, Clara caught one last look from him. It wasn't the smug, mocking glance she'd come to expect. This one was different, darker. She realized then that she hadn't seen the last of him. And whatever he was planning next, it wouldn't be in the shadows. Because men like Ethan didn't disappear quietly. They doubled down. The morning after the Hearts for Hope gala, Clara woke to the sound of Daniel's phone vibrating on the nightstand, again and again. It was barely 6 a.m., and he was already pulling himself upright, his expression tight. "Everything okay?" she asked, still groggy. He didn't answer right away, scrolling through notifications. "We've got a problem," he finally said, swinging his legs over the bed. A big one. Within minutes she was downstairs in the kitchen, coffee in hand, watching Daniel pace while his phone buzzed nonstop. Overnight, a story had broken on several major news sites. The headline hit like a punch: "Reeve Logistics under federal investigation for contract irregularities." The article claimed that one of Daniel's early government contracts, a deal to supply emergency transport vehicles, was under scrutiny for possible conflicts of interest. Anonymous sources alleged that the contract had been awarded thanks to social connections rather than merit. Clara didn't need to guess whose anonymous sources those were. The phrasing was too pointed, too familiar. "This is Ethan," she said flatly. Daniel nodded. "It's not even accurate. Every contract we've ever had is above board. But the damage is in the perception. If investors get spooked, our stock could tank before I have a chance to explain." By mid-morning, cable news was running the story in rotation. Stock tickers at the bottom of the screen showed Reeve Logistics sliding 5%, then 7%. Reporters camped outside their downtown headquarters. Daniel's legal team moved fast, issuing statements, requesting meetings with the Department of Transportation, but the momentum of the smear was already rolling downhill. Then came the second blow. Two key investors, both of whom had been circling a major expansion deal, abruptly pulled out, citing concerns about reputational risk. It wasn't a coincidence. Clara recognized one of the names from Ethan's real estate donor circles. He'd poisoned the well. By the end of the week, Reeve Logistics' market cap had dropped nearly $1 billion. Staff at headquarters whispered in hallways, eyes darting to Clara as if she might be the answer to every unspoken question. Daniel kept his composure in public, but at night, Clara saw the strain. He'd sit at his desk long after midnight, lit only by his laptop screen, going over contracts line by line, searching for any chink Ethan could twist into a weapon. Clara hated seeing him like that. The man who had once built something from nothing, now fighting to keep vultures from tearing it apart. And the worst part? She knew Ethan was enjoying every second. She was proven right when a thick envelope arrived by courier one afternoon. Inside was a single printed photo. It was from years ago, a candid shot of Clara at a networking event during her marriage to Ethan. She was smiling, a champagne flute in her hand, standing beside a state transportation official. Scrawled across the bottom in red marker were the words, "Nice to see some things never change." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Clara's hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. Ethan wasn't just trying to hurt Daniel's company. He was trying to rewrite history, to paint her as the same powerless woman he could humiliate at will. The following Monday, Daniel had to appear before a closed-door committee to answer questions about the contract. Clara stayed home, watching the markets, fielding texts from concerned friends, ignoring the vicious chatter online. When Daniel returned that evening, he looked exhausted. "They're not bringing charges," he said, "but the investigation will stay open for now, which means every deal we try to make is going to have a shadow over it until this is cleared." Clara reached for his hand. "We'll get through this." But that night, lying awake, she realized something. Waiting for the truth to clear their name wasn't enough. Ethan wasn't going to stop. Every day they played defense, he was on offense. And in her gut, she knew the only way to protect what they'd built was to flip the game entirely. She started quietly. She called an old friend from her library days, now working as a researcher for a major investigative podcast. She asked about digging into Warner Development, Ethan's company. Public records, old lawsuits, contract filings. The friend hesitated. "Are you sure you want to open that box?" "I'm sure," Clara said. "Ethan thinks he's the only one who can pull strings. Let's see how he likes it when the curtain gets pulled back on him." Within days, she had a file in her inbox. It was just the beginning. Old zoning disputes, over-budget projects, suspicious shell companies tied to offshore accounts. Nothing explosive yet, but enough to know there were cracks in Ethan's marble facade. Meanwhile, the pressure on Daniel grew. A planned appearance on a morning business show was canceled due to the ongoing investigation. One of their biggest clients postponed renewing a contract, saying they wanted to monitor the situation. One evening, as they sat on the couch in the dim light, Daniel finally let his guard down. "I hate that you're getting dragged into this," he said. "I built this company to be bulletproof. I thought if I kept my head down, focused on the work, people would see that. But I underestimated how far someone like Ethan would go." Clara turned to face him. "Then maybe it's time we stop underestimating me." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know Ethan's playbook. I've lived it. And if he wants a public war, I'm not going to sit on the sidelines while he tries to destroy you." Daniel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but if we do this, we do it smart." For the first time in days, Clara felt a spark of something other than dread. The next morning, she called her contact again. "Let's talk about the shell companies," she said. Because Clara Mayfield had spent years being underestimated, first by Ethan, then by the circles that whispered behind her back. But those years had also taught her how to listen, how to read between the lines, how to connect dots others ignored. And now, with Daniel's empire on the line, she wasn't just going to defend it. She was going to burn Ethan's game to the ground. And when she did, the whole world would be watching. The file Clara had received from her friend was a spiderweb. Lines connecting shell companies, overseas accounts, and suspicious property transfers. But in the middle of that web, one particular name kept popping up: Northview Holdings. On paper, it was an innocuous investment group based out of the Cayman Islands. In reality, Clara's friend explained, it appeared to be a holding company that funneled money into multiple Warner Development projects. The strange part? The timeline. Some of the biggest transfers happened years before Ethan had the kind of capital to fund those deals himself. Where would he get that kind of money back then? Clara asked. Her friend lowered her voice, even though they were alone on the call. That's the thing. Some of those transfers match patterns we've seen in cases involving bribery and illegal lobbying. I can't say for sure without deeper digging, but if this were to come to light, it could blow up his entire career. Clara sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Ethan had built his reputation on being self-made, the golden boy who turned grit into skyscrapers. If this was true, that entire image was a lie. For the first time since Ethan's smear campaign had begun, Clara felt the balance shift. She had something he couldn't explain away with charm or half-truths. But she also knew she had to be careful. If she mishandled it, he'd spin it as a personal vendetta. This had to be strategic, timed perfectly, backed by undeniable proof. That night, she told Daniel everything. They sat at the dining table, the city lights stretching out beyond the windows. Daniel listened silently, his fingers steepled under his chin. This could destroy him, Clara said. Not just publicly, but legally. Daniel nodded slowly. It could also blow back on us if it looks like we're the ones leaking it. And Ethan won't hesitate to paint you as some bitter ex-wife out for revenge. I know, she said. That's why I'm not rushing this. But if we can connect this to a specific illegal deal. Daniel finished the thought. We hit him where it hurts most, his credibility, and once that's gone, everything else collapses. For the next week, Clara worked quietly behind the scenes. She contacted former Warner Development employees, assistants, accountants, site managers. Most were hesitant, but a few agreed to talk off the record. One conversation changed everything. A retired project manager named Luis remembered a high-profile development from 8 years ago, the Kensington Towers project. Warner Development had landed the contract despite being the smallest bidder. Luis claimed that Northview Holdings had made a large, unexplained consulting payment to a city council member just weeks before the vote. I didn't stick around after that, Luis admitted. Didn't want my name anywhere near it. But if you can find the council meeting records and the payment logs, you'll have your smoking gun. Clara thanked him, her heart pounding. She dug into public archives, cross-referencing dates and amounts. And there it was, buried in a PDF of a quarterly financial disclosure from the council member's office. A $750,000 consulting fee from Northview Holdings. It was the missing piece. She knew Ethan would recognize her fingerprints on this if it came out immediately. So she made a choice that surprised even herself. She wouldn't be the one to break the story. Instead, she reached out to an investigative journalist known for exposing corporate corruption. She sent only enough to pique interest, a few public documents, a timeline, and the tip about Kensington Towers. Within days, the journalist replied, "Following up, we've got something big here. Give us 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks were a test of patience. Daniel was still fighting to stabilize the company's stock price. The investigation into their government contract was still open, and Ethan was quiet. Too quiet. Clara knew him well enough to recognize the pattern. He was planning something. Her confirmation came at a fundraising dinner for the city's Historic Preservation Society. Halfway through the evening, one of Daniel's board members pulled him aside, looking grim. "I heard Warner's been talking to some of our partners," the board member said, suggesting they reconsider their relationship with Reeve Logistics. "Word is, he's dangling investment opportunities if they distance themselves from you." Daniel kept his composure, but later, in the car, his voice was tight. "He's trying to isolate us. If he can make us look unstable, he thinks he can scare everyone into cutting ties." Clara looked out the window at the blur of city lights. "Then it's time we stop waiting for the right moment. The moment is now." The following Monday, the journalist's story dropped online at 7 a.m. By 7:15, it was the top trending topic on social media. Self-made? Investigative report links Warner Development to offshore bribes in Kensington Towers deal. The article laid everything out: the shell companies, the suspicious payments, the connection to the city council vote. It quoted multiple former employees, detailed the pattern of similar deals, and questioned whether Warner Development's rise had been fueled by illegal lobbying. News anchors read excerpts live on air. Business channels debated whether Ethan could survive the fallout. The city's ethics committee announced a formal review within hours. Clara watched the coverage from her office, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. This wasn't petty revenge. This was accountability. By noon, Ethan's PR team had released a statement calling the allegations baseless and politically motivated. But the damage was already done. Investors started calling for him to step down. That evening, Clara received a single text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? This isn't over." She deleted it without replying. Because she knew something Ethan didn't, she wasn't done either. If the first half of this fight had been about survival, the second half was going to be about transformation. For years, she had measured her worth by how small she could make herself to fit into someone else's world. Now, standing beside Daniel as an equal, she saw the truth. She didn't just belong in these rooms. She could own them. She started making calls, not as Daniel's partner but as Clara Mayfield, independent investor and strategist. She began meeting with nonprofits, city planners, and entrepreneurs, exploring partnerships under her own name. The same week Ethan was subpoenaed for questioning, Clara was invited to join the board of a major urban development initiative, the kind of role Ethan used to boast about holding. She accepted, without hesitation. The message was clear. She wasn't hiding in anyone's shadow anymore. And soon, at the biggest gala of the season, she would prove it in front of the same crowd that had once watched her be humiliated. Only this time, she'd be the one holding the microphone. The night of the Metropolitan Impact Awards Gala was one of those rare evenings where Chicago felt like the center of the universe. The city's skyline glittered like a crown, and the Grand Metropolitan Hall, with its soaring marble columns and sweeping staircases, pulsed with the energy of power, money, and influence, all gathered under one roof. Clara stood in front of the mirror in her penthouse bedroom, taking one last look at herself. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The soft-spoken, tentative version of herself that Ethan had once kept in the background was gone. Her gown was custom-made, deep sapphire velvet with a dramatic slit and a neckline that spoke of confidence without a hint of apology. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, revealing diamond drop earrings she had chosen herself. Not borrowed, not gifted to win her compliance. She had become her own curator. When Daniel came in from the adjoining room, already in his black tuxedo, he stopped in the doorway. "You look." His voice caught for a second. "Like you're exactly where you're meant to be." Clara smiled, but there was steel beneath it. "Tonight isn't just about looking like I belong. Tonight is about making sure no one ever forgets it." The gala was the kind of event that defined social standing for the next year. Awards were given not just for philanthropy, but for impact. A nebulous term that meant influence, visibility, and the ability to shape the city's future. Daniel was there to present a major award. Clara was there as an honoree herself, recognized for her work on the urban development initiative she had joined just weeks before. As they stepped out of the limousine, the red carpet erupted in flashes. Reporters shouted questions, microphones extended toward them. Clara answered easily, her voice steady, her smile warm but commanding. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roses and champagne. Clara could feel eyes on her, some curious, some admiring, a few measuring. But she walked with her head high, Daniel at her side, the picture of a power couple who were equals in every way. And then she saw him. Ethan. He was across the room, engaged in animated conversation with two men Clara recognized as city council members. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfect, but there was something in his posture, a stiffness, that told her he was still reeling from the investigation. Their eyes met briefly. His smirk returned, but it didn't have the same easy arrogance it once did. There was tension there, wariness. Dinner passed in a blur of speeches and applause. Clara's category was near the end of the program. When the MC finally announced, "Please welcome Clara Mayfield to the stage," the room erupted in polite clapping, with a few genuine cheers from her allies. She walked to the podium with deliberate grace, the hem of her gown gliding over the stage. Cameras followed her every step, projecting her image onto two massive screens. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. When I first moved to this city, I didn't know a single person in a room like this. I didn't have the right connections, or the right last name, or the kind of confidence it takes to stand here tonight. But what I did have was a belief that we are measured not by the power we take, but by the opportunities we create for others. She glanced toward the table where Ethan sat, his expression unreadable. In my early years here, I learned some hard lessons, she continued. I learned what it feels like to be underestimated, to be spoken for instead of listened to be told in ways subtle and blunt that my value was tied to who I was standing beside, rather than who I was. The room was silent now, every ear tuned to her words. But those lessons were also gifts, she said, her tone warming, because they showed me the kind of leader I never want to be, and they reminded me that the truest measure of success isn't applause in a ballroom, it's the impact you leave when no one's watching. She closed with a call to action for the development initiative, urging the city's elite to invest in projects that served entire communities, not just profit margins. The applause that followed was thunderous, genuine. As she stepped down from the stage, Daniel met her at the edge, his eyes shining with pride. That was perfect. But not everyone was clapping. Ethan's gaze followed her as she returned to their table, his fingers drumming slowly against the white tablecloth. He didn't approach her right away, but she could feel the tension building, the way predators circle before they strike. Sure enough, when the formal program ended and guests began mingling again, Ethan made his move. "Clara," he said smoothly, appearing at her side as if summoned. "Congratulations, quite the speech." "Thank you," she replied, her tone polite but cool. "You've certainly evolved since we last shared a stage," he said, his smile edged. "But you should know, this city has a long memory, and not all of it is flattering." Clara met his gaze evenly. "Then I guess it's a good thing I'm not here to please the past." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Irritation, maybe even uncertainty. But he recovered quickly, leaning in just slightly. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. You'll find it's not as warm when people start asking the right questions." Before she could respond, he melted back into the crowd, leaving only the faintest trace of cologne and the unmistakable scent of a threat. Daniel appeared at her side almost instantly. "What did he say?" Clara shook her head. "Nothing new, just another reminder that he's still playing." But this time, she wasn't intimidated. She felt a strange calm instead, the kind that came from knowing she wasn't reacting anymore. She was directing. Because what Ethan didn't realize was that she had already set the final act in motion. And when the curtain fell, it wouldn't just be a win for her and Daniel. It would be the end of Ethan's reign entirely, and the city would see it happen in real time. The morning after the Metropolitan Impact Awards, Clara woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just that her speech had landed, it was that she had seen it in people's eyes. They no longer saw her as Daniel's partner or Ethan's ex. They saw her as Clara Mayfield, a force in her own right. And now, she intended to use that. Her first step was symbolic, but necessary. She booked an appointment with Chicago's most exclusive image consultant, not to change who she was, but to refine how the world saw her. By the end of the week, her wardrobe was streamlined, sharp, tailored suits in bold colors, sleek evening gowns that moved like water, statement accessories chosen not for price tags but for presence. Her hairstylist updated her look to a soft, modern wave she could wear in the boardroom or on a red carpet. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Clara began laying the groundwork for the strike that would end Ethan's game once and for all. She met with the investigative journalist who had exposed the Kensington Towers scandal. Together, they mapped out the next phase, a deeper dive into Warner Development's financial practices, this time with a focus on active projects. The journalist leaned over the table in their quiet cafe booth. "You're sure you want to go public with this? It'll make you a direct target." Clara's answer was steady. "He already made me one. The difference now is, I'm ready for it." Through her contacts on the Urban Development Board, Clara learned of a high-profile waterfront project Ethan was bidding on, a billion-dollar contract that would cement his comeback if he landed it. She also learned that his bid was backed by questionable financing, routed through a chain of companies suspiciously similar to Northview Holdings. If she could bring that to light at the right moment, in the right forum, Ethan's credibility wouldn't just take another hit, it would collapse entirely. Timing would be everything. Her opportunity came when the city announced a public forum to discuss the waterfront project's environmental and economic impact. Stakeholders, journalists, and community leaders would all be present. So would the competing bidders, including Ethan. Clara knew this was the stage she'd been waiting for. In the weeks leading up to the forum, she doubled down on her public presence. She accepted speaking engagements, appeared on local business panels, and wrote op-eds about ethical development practices. Each time, she positioned herself not as someone tearing a man down, but as a leader fighting for transparency and accountability in the city's growth. Daniel watched her transformation with a mix of admiration and awe. "You're running a full campaign," he said one night as they reviewed her calendar. Clara smiled faintly. "No, I'm telling a story, and by the time it's over, no one will question the ending." Still, she knew she had to prepare for Ethan's counterpunch, and it came right on schedule. A week before the forum, a gossip blog ran a piece claiming Clara had only joined the Urban Development Board to influence contract decisions in Daniel's favor. The article cited anonymous sources who said she was leveraging personal relationships to sway votes. Daniel was furious. This is the same garbage he's been pushing from day one. Clara wasn't rattled. "Let him. Every time he tries to smear me now, it just proves my point, that he fears transparency." She responded with a calm, factual statement, emphasizing her commitment to ethical practices and inviting the public to attend the forum themselves. The response was overwhelmingly in her favor. And then came the final piece of her plan. 2 nights before the forum, she met again with the journalist, sliding a slim flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is on there. Shell company registrations, bank transfers, internal memos from Warner Development's own people. It's all tied to the waterfront bid." The journalist glanced at the drive, then at Clara. "You realize this could end him." Clara's voice was calm, almost quiet. "That's the point." On the morning of the forum, Clara dressed with precision. A charcoal gray suit with a silk blouse the color of champagne, simple gold earrings, and a leather portfolio in hand. Daniel kissed her cheek before she left. "You've got this," he said. The forum hall was packed. Cameras lined the back wall, ready to broadcast the proceedings live. The moderator opened with prepared remarks before inviting each bidder to present their case. Ethan went second. He took the stage with his trademark confidence, walking the audience through glossy renderings of luxury condos, boutique shops, and green spaces. His tone was polished, his pitch designed to charm. But as Clara watched from her seat, she noticed the small tells. The tightness in his jaw, the way he avoided eye contact with certain city officials. He knew she was there. He knew she was ready. When it was her turn to speak during the open comment period, she walked to the microphone with deliberate calm. "My name is Clara Mayfield," she began, "and I serve on the board for the Urban Renewal and Development Initiative. Tonight, I want to speak not about aesthetics or projections, but about integrity." She paused just long enough for the room to settle. "In recent weeks, I've reviewed public and financial records related to the current bids for the waterfront project. One of those bids, submitted by Warner Development, is supported by a funding structure routed through offshore shell companies with no transparent ownership, a structure strikingly similar to one previously linked to illegal payments in the Kensington Towers deal." The ripple through the audience was instant. Ethan's head snapped toward her, his expression darkening. "I am not here to pass judgment," Clara continued. "I am here to ask that we hold every bidder to the highest standard of transparency, that we remember this city's future should not be built on shadowed deals and hidden accounts, but on open, honest partnerships." By the time she returned to her seat, the journalist had already slipped out of the room. She knew what that meant. The story would break before the night was over. Ethan approached her in the hallway during the recess, his smile tight. "You've made your point," he said, low enough for only her to hear. "But you've also made an enemy you can't control." Clara met his gaze steadily. "You've been my enemy for years, Ethan. The only difference now is everyone else knows it too." She walked away without looking back. That night, As the forum coverage replayed on every local channel, the journalists' new exposé went live. By midnight, Warner Development's bid had been suspended pending investigation. And Clara knew. The final act was ready. All that remained was the stage. And she was about to choose the biggest one yet. The city's annual leadership gala was the most exclusive night of the year. It wasn't televised like some charity events. It didn't need to be. The power in that room could move millions of dollars with a handshake, decide the future of entire neighborhoods over a glass of champagne. And Clara had chosen it as the stage for the final act. It wasn't just about humiliation. She wanted Ethan's fall to be absolute, witnessed by the very people whose respect he craved. Tonight would make sure no door opened for him again. 2 weeks after the forum, invitations to the gala had gone out, and Clara knew Ethan would attend. He couldn't resist a room like that, even under investigation. The whispers around him were already loud, but he was too arrogant to imagine they could drown him out completely. Clara arrived with Daniel, stepping into the marble foyer under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. She wore a black silk gown with an asymmetrical neckline and a sweeping train, sleek, modern, commanding. Daniel's arm was steady around her waist, but he didn't need to say a word. He knew exactly what she intended to do tonight. The ballroom hummed with polite conversation. Waiters floated by with champagne flutes, and a jazz trio played softly near the stage. Clara spotted Ethan almost immediately, working the room with his signature smile, though his shoulders were tighter than she remembered. They made eye contact. He smirked. She smiled back, but this time her smile was a challenge. Midway through the evening, the program began. Awards were handed out, speeches made. The final segment of the night was a panel discussion on the future of urban development. Both Clara and Ethan had been invited as panelists alongside other leaders. It was the perfect setup, and she'd made sure of it by confirming her spot weeks ago. The panel was held on a raised stage, the audience seated at round tables facing them. The moderator began with polite, scripted questions about sustainability, innovation, and community impact. Ethan answered with his usual charm, sprinkling in half-truths about Warner Development's commitment to transparency. Clara waited, letting him speak first. She wanted him comfortable, confident, unaware that the trap was already closing. Then the moderator turned to her. "Miss Mayfield, given your recent work on the Urban Renewal Board, how do you see the role of ethical oversight in major development projects?" Clara leaned forward slightly, her voice clear and measured. "I believe oversight isn't a barrier to progress. It's the foundation for lasting growth. Without transparency, you can build the tallest tower in the city, but its foundation will still be made of sand." A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. She continued, "We've seen what happens when deals are made in the shadows. Promises to communities are broken, resources are misused, and sometimes those shadows hide more than just bad planning. They hide corruption." The word hung in the air like a strike of thunder. The audience stilled. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Clara didn't look at him yet. Instead, she turned back to the moderator. "In fact, the recent investigation into the waterfront bid is a perfect example. When offshore shell companies funnel millions into a project without clear ownership, we have to ask why, who benefits, and who pays the price." Ethan spoke up sharply. "With respect, these are unproven allegations." She cut him off, her tone calm but firm. "They're not unproven, Ethan. The records are public. Bank transfers, corporate registrations, all there for anyone who cares to look. The fact that your company used nearly identical structures in the Kensington Towers deal, which is already under investigation for bribery, raises serious questions." Gasps scattered through the audience. A few heads turned toward Ethan, their expressions shifting. Clara let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. "This city deserves better than backroom deals and financial smokescreens. It deserves leaders who answer questions instead of dodging them. So I'll ask you directly, here and now, in front of our peers, will you disclose the full list of Warner Development's offshore financial interests?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I will not dignify." "Then I think your answer is clear," Clara said, her voice steady, unflinching. The moderator tried to smooth over the tension, but the damage was done. The energy in the room had shifted. Guests leaned toward each other, whispering. A few took out their phones, no doubt searching for the articles that had circulated in the wake of the forum. When the panel ended, applause was polite but subdued. Ethan left the stage quickly, his smile brittle. Clara, on the other hand, was surrounded almost immediately. City officials congratulated her on her courage. Journalists asked for follow-up interviews. In the corner of her eye, she saw Ethan at the bar, shoulders hunched, speaking in clipped tones to Tara. For the first time, he looked small in a room he once owned. Daniel joined her, his expression proud. "You just ended him," he murmured. "Not yet," Clara said quietly, "but by tomorrow morning, he'll wish I had." She was right. The next day, the panel footage went viral. Snippets of Clara confronting Ethan were shared across social media with captions like "Queen Energy" and "This is how you handle a corrupt man." Local news stations replayed the exchange, framing it as a turning point in the city's business culture. By noon, two major partners announced they were suspending all joint ventures with Warner Development, pending review of recent allegations. A third canceled outright. That evening, the city's ethics committee released a statement. Warner Development's executives, including Ethan Warner, were to be subpoenaed for a public hearing on financial misconduct. Daniel poured 2 glasses of champagne when the news broke. "To you," he said, handing her one. Clara clinked her glass against his. "To us, and to never letting anyone write our story for us again." She took a sip, the bubbles sharp and bright on her tongue. She didn't just feel victorious, she felt free. But she also knew there was one last thing she needed to do. Not for the city, not for the media, but for herself. She would look Ethan in the eye one final time. Not to gloat, but to close the chapter completely. And she already knew exactly when and where it would happen. The public hearing was set for a crisp Friday morning in late October. The City Hall steps were swarming with reporters, their breath fogging in the cool air, cameras poised for the moment Ethan Warner would arrive. Clara wasn't required to be there. She wasn't testifying. She had already given her statement to the ethics committee privately. But this wasn't about obligation. This was about ending it on her terms. She arrived alone, dressed in a camel-colored coat over a navy sheath dress, her hair in a sleek twist. The click of her heels on the stone steps was steady, unhurried. Daniel had offered to come with her, but she'd declined. This was something she needed to face without anyone at her side. Inside the chamber, the air buzzed with anticipation. The long wooden table at the front was lined with committee members, their nameplates gleaming under the overhead lights. Rows of seats behind them were filled with journalists, city staff, and members of the public. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, flanked by 2 lawyers. His suit was immaculate, his tie perfect, but there were dark shadows under his eyes. When his gaze swept the room and landed on Clara, there was no smirk, no charm, just recognition. The proceedings began. Committee members took turns asking pointed, precise questions about Warner Development's offshore accounts, the Kensington Towers payments, and the waterfront bid. Ethan's answers were evasive at first, polished and confident, but as the evidence was read into the record, the bank transfers, the shell company registrations, the memos from his own staff, the veneer began to crack. One committee member leaned forward. "Mr. Warner, are you prepared to provide a full accounting of these financial structures today?" Ethan's lawyer interjected, requesting to submit written responses at a later date. The chairwoman denied the request. The room was silent, except for the faint scratching of a reporter's pen. For the first time, Clara saw Ethan hesitate. His fingers tapped lightly against the table. He glanced at his lawyers, then back at the committee. "We'll have to review these documents before." The chairwoman cut him off. "The documents are in front of you now. You've been given every opportunity to explain these transactions. Your continued refusal will be noted." It was the sound of a man losing control. By the time the hearing recessed for lunch, the headlines were already rolling. Warner dodges questions in explosive ethics hearing, and offshore accounts at center of Warner scandal. Clara stepped outside into the cool sunlight. She expected to feel triumphant, but instead she felt lighter, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally shifted off her shoulders. That's when she saw him. Ethan had slipped out a side door, away from the main press cluster. For a moment, they stood a few yards apart, just looking at each other. He walked toward her slowly. "You've made your point," he said, his voice lower than she remembered. Clara held his gaze. This was never about making a point. It was about the truth. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "And now? You've ruined me. Is that what you wanted?" She shook her head. "What I wanted was for you to stop hurting people just because you could. If that ruins you, that's on you, not me." For a flicker of a moment, his shoulders sagged. She wondered if this was the first time in years he'd been forced to stand without the armor of his image. "Goodbye, Ethan," she said simply. She turned and walked away, not looking back. That evening, Daniel met her at their apartment with takeout and champagne. They ate at the dining table, the city lights stretching out around them. "To the end of it," Daniel said, raising his glass. Clara clinked hers against his. "To the beginning of something better." In the weeks that followed, Warner Development's contracts were frozen. Ethan resigned as CEO under pressure from his board. Multiple agencies opened formal investigations. The man who had once been the darling of the city's development scene became its cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Clara's world expanded. Her work with the Urban Renewal Board gained national attention, leading to speaking invitations from other cities. She and Daniel began a joint initiative to support small local contractors, the kind often pushed out by massive shady deals like Ethan's. And in quiet moments, Clara allowed herself to feel proud. Not just because she had won, but because she had done it without becoming like the man she fought against. On a snowy evening in December, she attended a ribbon cutting for a community housing project she had championed. As she stood beside Daniel, watching families step into their new homes, she felt the hum of joy and possibility in the air. The cameras caught her smiling, but what they couldn't capture was the thought running through her mind, that no matter where she had started, no matter who had once tried to define her, she had built something that couldn't be taken away. Later, as they drove home through the snow-covered streets, Daniel reached for her hand. "You know," he said, "there's a whole world out there that still needs what you have to give." Clara squeezed his hand back. "Then let's go give it to them." The city skyline rose ahead of them, lights twinkling against the winter night. And Clara Mayfield, once underestimated, once laughed at, knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of the chapter she had always been meant to write, because she had learned that a woman's greatest power isn't in proving people wrong, it's in proving herself right. So the story has ended. Our wonderful friends, are you still here until now? If you are, it means something in this journey has touched your heart. Clara's path reminds us that true strength isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your voice and standing tall in your truth. As an old saying from heterodox thought goes, healing begins the moment you stop living in someone else's story. Life will hand you battles, and sometimes the greatest victory is walking away free, with your dignity intact and your purpose clear. If this story has stirred something in you, let it be a reminder that no matter who doubted you, your worth is not theirs to define. If you feel this truth, give this video a like, share it so others can feel it too, and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, what's the moment you knew you had to reclaim your own story?